On our wedding night he handed me the guest room key. Mom says the master bedroom is hers. She chose my dress, cut our guest list, even posed as hostess at our reception. I wasn't allowed to hang a photo, cook in her kitchen, or speak at family dinners. A year later I handed her an eviction notice, signed by her husband. I didn't raise my voice. I just rose. The key felt cold and foreign in my palm as I stared at it in disbelief. The small brass object weighed heavier than my diamond ring, heavier than the wedding vows we'd exchanged just hours before. Mom's already asleep. Her back's been acting up, Zach explained casually, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. His eyes avoided mine, focused instead on a point somewhere over my shoulder. She needs her rest. I stood frozen in the hallway of what was supposed to be our home, still wearing my wedding gown. The makeup that had been meticulously applied at dawn was now fading, my carefully styled hair falling loose around my shoulders. My high heels dangled from my fingertips, removed during our awkward, silent car ride from the reception. Joanna had claimed the master bedroom, our bedroom. The room where I'd imagined starting my married life. "This is a joke, right?" I whispered, my voice barely audible in the dark hallway. Zach's expression remained blank. "It's just for tonight. You know how she gets when her back flares up." But I knew better. I'd seen Joanna's suitcases arrive yesterday, watched her unpack her clothes into the master closet while directing movers where to place her personal furniture. At the time I'd thought it was temporary, just for the wedding preparations. Now the truth crashed down around me like shattered crystal. The dress I wore hadn't even been my choice. Joanna had taken over the bridal appointment, dismissing the fitted lace gown I'd fallen in love with. "Too revealing," she declared with a tight smile. Instead she'd selected this plain, high-necked monstrosity that hung like a tent on my frame. "Modesty is timeless," she'd insisted, while the bridal consultant shot me sympathetic glances. Zach had said nothing then, just as he said nothing now. I thought back to the reception, how different it had been from everything I'd dreamed. My college roommate Sarah had texted that morning, "Can't wait to see you. So excited to celebrate." But she never arrived. Neither did my childhood friend Megan, nor my coworkers, nor my cousins from Seattle. "Budget cuts," Zach had explained with an apologetic shrug when I questioned the half-empty reception hall. Only later did I discover that Joanna had personally called them, informing each that the wedding had become an intimate family affair. And then there was Joanna herself, dressed in cream-colored silk that was almost white, greeting guests at the door as if she were the bride. "Welcome to our celebration," she'd announced to each arrival. "I'm Joanna, mother of the house." Mother of the house. Not mother of the groom. She'd commandeered the microphone during the reception, delivering a 20-minute speech about raising Zach, about the family legacy, about traditions that must be maintained. When the DJ attempted to pass the microphone to me for a few words of thanks, Joanna had smoothly intercepted it, declaring it was time for the first dance. A dance that she initiated with her son while I stood awkwardly to the side, watching my husband waltz with another woman on my wedding day. Now here I was, being directed to a guest room in what was supposed to be my home. A home where Joanna had already established her dominance. The walls were bare of any photos I'd selected. The furniture arranged according to her preferences. Even the kitchen, which I'd so eagerly anticipated making our own, was strictly off-limits. "Zach likes his meals prepared a certain way," she'd informed me earlier that week. "Best to leave the cooking to someone who knows his tastes." I looked at my husband now, searching for some sign of discomfort, some acknowledgement that this situation was abnormal. But his face remained placid, unbothered. "When do we get to be married?" I asked quietly, still clutching the guest room key. His expression hardened slightly. "Don't start, Chelsea. Let's not upset her. You're being difficult. Difficult. For wanting to sleep beside my husband on our wedding night. For wanting to feel like this was my home too." Zach leaned forward, pressed a quick kiss to my forehead, the kind of kiss you give a child, and turned away. "Get some rest. I'll see you in the morning." I watched him retreat down the hallway, not to another guest room but to the living room couch. Even he wouldn't claim the space next to his mother. Yet neither would he stand beside me. The guest room was impersonal and cold, decorated in beige and cream with generic landscape paintings on the walls. I closed the door behind me, finally allowing my shoulders to slump. My wedding dress caught on the edge of the bed as I sank down onto the unfamiliar mattress. With mechanical movements, I began removing the pins from my hair, placing them one by one on the nightstand. I unzipped the dress I never wanted, stepping out of it and hanging it carefully in the closet, a closet devoid of any other clothes. I hadn't even been allowed to move my things in advance. I sat on the edge of the bed in my slip, staring at my reflection in the small vanity mirror across the room. I looked like a stranger to myself, diminished somehow, faded around the edges. The woman who had walked down the aisle that morning already seemed like a different person, one who still believed in fairy tales and happy endings. But as I stared at my reflection, something else flickered in my eyes. Something hard and resolute. I didn't cry. Not a single tear. Instead, I methodically washed my face, brushed my teeth with the complimentary toothbrush left for guests, and slipped between the cold sheets of the unfamiliar bed. Lying in the darkness, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing and yet oddly clear. This wasn't at all what I had imagined marriage would be. This wasn't partnership or love or respect. This was training. Joanna was training me to be small, to be obedient, to accept scraps of affection and space. And Zach was complicit, too weak or too comfortable to challenge the status quo. But as I lay there in the guest room of what should have been my marital home, I made a silent promise to myself. I would not cry. I would not beg. I would not plead with Zach to choose me over his mother. Instead, I would watch. I would learn. I would understand exactly how this household operated, and then I would change it. Because I refused to stay domesticated. I refused to be the obedient daughter-in-law, grateful for whatever scraps of autonomy I was thrown. Tomorrow I would wake up as a different woman. A woman with a plan. My wedding night may have been spent alone in a guest room, but I swore it would be the last night I ever felt invisible in my own life. Morning arrived with the sound of Joanna's voice outside my door. Not knocking, just talking loudly enough to wake me. "Breakfast is at 7:30 sharp," she announced to Zach in the hallway. Chelsea should dress appropriately. No loungewear at the table. I'd been married exactly 12 hours and already there was a dress code for breakfast. When I emerged from the guest room wearing jeans and a sweater, Joanna's smile tightened slightly. "We dress for breakfast in this house, dear. Perhaps tomorrow you could wear something more presentable." I glanced at Zach, who was absorbed in his phone. He wore sweatpants. The kitchen gleamed with spotless perfection. Every appliance had its place, every surface scrubbed to an unnatural shine. Joanna moved through it with military precision, placing 3 identical plates at the table. "Egg whites and whole grain toast," she announced, sliding a plate before me. "No butter. Zach needs to watch his cholesterol." My husband had perfect cholesterol. I'd gone with him to his last physical. "I usually have coffee first thing," I ventured. "Caffeine disrupts hormonal balance," Joanna replied without looking up. "There's herbal tea in the cabinet. The green tin, not the blue. The blue is for digestive issues." She slid a small glass dish toward me containing 2 capsules and a vitamin. "Take these with water, not juice. The acidity interferes with absorption." I stared at the pills. "What are these?" "Just a women's multivitamin and some supplements for feminine health." The way she emphasized feminine made it sound like a disease. This became our routine. Each morning, Joanna would dictate what I should eat when I should eat it, and which supplements would fix whatever she had decided was wrong with me that day. "Your complexion looks dry. Fish oil capsules today. Your posture is slouching. Calcium and magnesium. You seem irritable. Must be hormonal imbalance." I began discreetly disposing of the pills in napkins. The rules extended beyond meals. When I tried to hang a framed photo from our honeymoon, one of the few times we'd escaped Joanna's presence, she intercepted me in the hallway. "We don't put personal photos in common areas," she informed me. "It creates visual clutter." Every wall in the house featured Joanna's taste. Landscape paintings in heavy gilt frames, formal portraits of Zach through various ages, and ancestral photographs of relatives I'd never meet. Nothing recent, nothing warm, nothing that included me. One afternoon I left our wedding portrait on the entryway table. Silver-framed, professional, perfectly acceptable by any standard. By morning it had vanished. I searched everywhere, finally discovering it buried in a drawer beneath guest linens. A yellow sticky note clung to the glass. "Too modern. Lacks sophistication." Did you see what your mother did? I asked Zach that evening. He sighed as if I'd mentioned a minor inconvenience like rain on a picnic. She's particular about decor. Just put it in the guest room. He still couldn't call it our room, this space where I lived like a long-term visitor. Even communication with the outside world fell under Joanna's domain. When I wrote an email to Zach's extended family thanking them for wedding gifts, Joanna somehow intercepted the draft. I took the liberty of making a few adjustments, she said, showing me her completely rewritten version on her tablet. Family correspondence reflects on all of us. My warm, personal message had been transformed into a formal, cold paragraph that sounded nothing like me. For Zach's birthday, I spent hours selecting a card with the perfect message, adding my own heartfelt note inside. The next morning, I found Joanna at the kitchen table with my card open before her, a pen in hand. "What are you doing?" I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "Just adding warmth," she replied without looking up. Your note was somewhat clinical. She had crossed out entire lines of my message and inserted her own thoughts, as if my feelings for my own husband needed translation. I snatched the card from her hands. "Don't touch my things." For once her polite mask slipped. "Everything in this house is my concern." Dinners became exercises in strategic placement. No matter the arrangement, Joanna always maneuvered herself between Zach and me. If I sat beside him, she would create a reason to switch, needing help with serving, claiming the light bothered her eyes, insisting certain chairs were better for her back. Even conversations were controlled. If I began telling Zach about my day, Joanna would interject with questions that derailed my story. If I mentioned work achievements, she would immediately pivot to Zach's childhood accomplishments. Chelsea's department exceeded their quarterly goals, I would say. "That reminds me of when Zachary won the state science fair in 4th grade. She would counter, effectively silencing me. When I suggested hosting a game night with friends, hoping to create some normalcy, Joanna's response was swift. "Don't be silly. We're grown-ups," she said with a dismissive wave. "Besides, board games harbor bacteria." Zach merely chuckled at her response. "She's a bit much, but that's just how she is." Just how she is. The phrase that excused every boundary violation, every control tactic, every subtle humiliation. Every request I made was reframed as immaturity. Every boundary I attempted to establish was dismissed as selfishness. Every decision I tried to make independently was corrected for my own good. "I'm concerned about your work hours," she said when I stayed late at the office, the only place I had autonomy. "Are you sure that haircut suits your face shape?" she asked when I changed my appearance without consultation. "Zach prefers the chicken prepared my way," she insisted when I attempted to cook dinner. Her control was relentless but always wrapped in concern, always disguised as helpful guidance. The psychological exhaustion was more effective than locks on doors. After 3 months of this subtle warfare, I began documenting everything. A small journal hidden between the mattress and box spring became my secret record. Names, dates, exact words. Evidence of a systematic campaign to minimize my existence. I recorded how many times Joanna interrupted me at dinner, 17 in one meal. How many decisions were countermanded, 32 in a week. How often Zach sided with her instead of me, every single time. The journal became my sanity, my proof that I wasn't imagining things, that this psychological dismantling was real and deliberate. 6 months into our marriage, while searching for a missing cufflink in Zach's desk, I discovered a folded document tucked beneath warranty cards and old receipts. Curiosity made me unfold it, and what I found changed everything. It was the deed to the house, the family heirloom Joanna claimed ancestral rights to. The property had been purchased just 5 years ago with Zach as the sole owner. Joanna's name appeared nowhere on the document. The house wasn't hers. This kingdom she ruled with iron certainty had no legal foundation. I carefully replaced the document exactly as I'd found it and closed the drawer, but my mind was racing. All this time, Joanna had been ruling a domain she had no claim to, and Zach had allowed it. I stood in the center of the house, this battleground where I'd been systematically diminished, and felt something shift inside me. A clarity I hadn't possessed before. She didn't own this kingdom, and I was done playing the servant. The discovery of the deed changed my strategy entirely. That night I lay awake planning my next steps. Direct confrontation would only strengthen Joanna's position. She thrived on emotional outbursts she could label as unstable behavior. I needed something more effective than anger. I needed information, leverage, legal standing. The following morning I stopped asking questions. Instead I watched and documented. At breakfast I smiled and accepted the daily vitamin ritual without comment. When Joanna rearranged the kitchen cabinets for the third time that month, I simply observed which items she prioritized and which she hid away. I noted how she always handled the household mail first, sorting through everything before distributing it. By week's end I'd established a pattern. Joanna checked our joint account statement every Friday afternoon while Zach played golf. She always used his home office computer, always left the banking tab open, always took precisely 45 minutes. So the following Friday I installed a small program on the computer before leaving for work. Nothing invasive, just a keystroke recorder that would email me a transcript of everything typed during that time window. What I discovered was illuminating. Joanna had been systematically transferring small amounts, $300 here, $425 there, from our joint account into what appeared to be her personal account. The amounts were carefully calculated to fall just below Zach's notice threshold. Most were labeled as household expenses or family obligations in the transaction notes. Over 8 months of marriage, she diverted nearly $12,000 of our money. The transactions coincided perfectly with her spa memberships, luxury shopping sprees, and extended lunch dates with friends at exclusive restaurants. Expenses she'd claimed were covered by her personal savings. More disturbing were the documents I found bearing Zach's signature. Documents he'd never mentioned. Insurance policies, investment reallocations, even a power of attorney form that gave Joanna access to accounts that should have been solely in his name. "Did you sign anything for your mother recently?" I asked casually one evening while we watched TV. Zach barely looked up. "Maybe. She handles that stuff. Less paperwork for me." "She's really good with signatures," I remarked. "Yeah, she's organized." He missed my meaning entirely. I arranged to work late the following Thursday, knowing Joanna attended her weekly bridge club. Instead of going to the office, I drove to a small law firm 40 minutes away, far enough that I wouldn't encounter any of Joanna's extensive social network. The estate attorney, Ms. Riviera, was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who listened without interruption as I laid out my situation. I showed her copies of the banking records, photographs of the house deed, and my detailed journal of Joanna's domestic regime. "So your mother-in-law has no legal claim to the property, yet exercises complete control over the household," she summarized. "Correct. And your husband enables this behavior?" "He was raised in it. He doesn't see it as abnormal." Ms. Riviera leaned back. "What exactly are you hoping to achieve, Mrs. Mitchell?" I thought carefully before answering. "I want what's legally mine as a spouse. Equal say in my own home. Financial security that can't be undermined. And I want my husband to make a choice. Our marriage or his mother's control." She nodded, making notes. "The property situation is straightforward. As Zach's spouse, you have certain rights regarding the marital home, regardless of whose name is on the deed. The financial diversion is more complicated but potentially actionable." I left with a comprehensive understanding of my legal position and a carefully outlined strategy. Knowledge is power, but timing is everything. Rather than confronting Joanna immediately, I began laying groundwork. First, I opened a separate bank account at a different institution. Each payday, I diverted half my income into this private account, never mentioning it to either Zach or Joanna. Next, I enrolled in an online certificate program in property law and spousal rights, studying late at night in the guest room that remained my bedroom. Understanding the legal framework would protect me from Joanna's inevitable counterattacks. On the surface, however, I changed nothing. I continued baking cookies for dinner parties where I barely spoke. I smiled at Joanna's backhanded compliments about my appearance. I nodded politely when she rearranged furniture I had straightened. "Your hair looks almost professional today," she'd say. "Thank you," I'd reply without argument. "Perhaps next time use the good plates for company," she'd suggest after I'd spent hours preparing dinner. "Of course," I'd agree, never revealing my irritation. Each night, I updated my journal with new incidents, new financial discrepancies, new evidence of the psychological minefield I navigated daily. I began working progressively later hours, volunteering for special projects that required evening commitments. This served multiple purposes: additional income for my separate account, professional advancement that strengthened my independence, and legitimate reasons to be absent from Joanna's domain. After several weeks of my modified schedule, Joanna confronted me in the kitchen one morning. "You're never around anymore," she observed, eyes narrowed slightly. "Zach mentions how late you've been working." I arranged my features into an expression of earnest concern. "I'm trying to make myself useful. Contributing to our household. Your primary contribution should be here," she replied, gesturing to the immaculate kitchen she wouldn't allow me to cook in. "A wife's place is in the home." "You're absolutely right," I agreed, watching her suspicion dissolve into self-satisfaction. "I'll try to do better." I didn't change my schedule at all. But now she believed I was appropriately intimidated. Meanwhile, I was building, not just a financial safety net or legal knowledge, but a comprehensive exit strategy. Not from my marriage necessarily, but from the power structure Joanna had created. I documented which household items were purchased with joint funds versus Joanna's mysterious separate accounts. I photographed each room, establishing a record of the home's condition and contents. I carefully noted which furniture had been in the house before our marriage and which had been added since. One afternoon, I discovered a file of old correspondence in Zach's office. Letters between him and his father, dating back several years. They revealed a strained relationship, not between father and son but between husband and wife. Zach's father, though physically present until his death 2 years ago, had been emotionally absent, beaten down by decades of Joanna's control tactics. "Your mother has strong opinions," one letter read. "Sometimes it's easier to let her have her way. But remember, son, the house is yours when I'm gone. I've arranged it that way specifically." The letter confirmed what I'd suspected. Zach's father had intentionally left the property to his son alone, an act of quiet rebellion against Joanna's domain. I had a plan forming now. One Joanna would never see coming, precisely because she underestimated me. She saw my politeness as weakness, my silence as submission, my careful documentation as merely obsessive housekeeping. She never suspected I was building a case, establishing legal standing, creating financial independence. Because she still thought I was scared of her. She interpreted my quiet compliance as defeat, not recognizing the strategic patience behind my smile. She didn't know I was already 2 steps ahead, moving pieces into position for a checkmate she couldn't anticipate. I was done being a guest in my own marriage, my own home. I was becoming the landlord. After 3 weeks of meticulous preparation, I selected a date, October 15th. A Tuesday. Joanna's bridge club was cancelled that week due to renovations at the community center, ensuring she'd be home. Zach would be off from work for a dental appointment in the afternoon. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. 2 days before, I'd finalized everything with Ms. Riviera. The legal documents were impeccable. A formal eviction notice with all proper citations of state property law, a detailed accounting of financial improprieties, and a cease and desist regarding any further unauthorized use of joint funds. "Are you certain you want to proceed this way?" Ms. Riviera had asked, her expression carefully neutral. "It will create significant family tension." "The tension already exists," I replied. "I'm just bringing it into the open where it can be resolved." The courier service was scheduled for 7 a.m. prompt delivery, early enough that Joanna wouldn't have fully armored herself for the day, but not so early that she could claim harassment. The night before, I barely slept. Not from anxiety but from a strange, electric anticipation. After nearly a year of calculated submission, of documenting and planning and building my case, the confrontation I'd engineered was finally at hand. I rose at 5:30 a.m., showered and dressed with particular care, a crisp blue button-down, tailored black pants and low heels. Professional attire. Battle armor. I applied minimal makeup, pulled my hair back into a sleek ponytail and fastened small pearl earrings, a wedding gift from my parents. By 6:45, I had brewed coffee and was seated at the kitchen table with my laptop open, reviewing work emails as though it were any ordinary morning. The house was still quiet. Joanna typically emerged at 7:30, Zach closer to 8 o'clock. The doorbell rang at exactly 7:10 a.m. I remained seated, taking a deliberate sip of coffee. The doorbell rang again. I heard shuffling from the master bedroom, then Joanna's voice, sharp with irritation. Who on earth is calling at this hour? Footsteps approached the front door. Joanna in her silk robe, hair still in curlers, face creased with sleep and annoyance. I angled my chair slightly to observe the entry hallway while pretending to focus on my screen. She pulled open the door. Yes. The courier, a young woman in a navy uniform, consulted her tablet. Delivery for Joanna Mitchell? That's me, Joanna replied, her voice softening slightly. She'd always modulated her tone for strangers, maintaining the facade of genteel respectability. Sign here, please. The courier extended her electronic tablet. Joanna scrawled her signature, accepted the crisp manila envelope, and closed the door. She examined the delivery, turning it over in her hands as she walked toward the kitchen. Her eyes narrowed when she saw me. You're up early. I smiled. Big day at work. Joanna glanced at the return address label on the envelope, her brow furrowing. Rivera and Associates Legal Services? What is this? Why don't you open it and find out? I suggested, my voice neutral. She slid her finger beneath the flap, extracted the documents, and began reading. I watched as comprehension dawned across her face. Confusion, disbelief, then mounting anger. Her hands began to tremble. What is this? I set down my coffee cup with deliberate precision. It's a formal eviction notice. 30 days to vacate the premises. Your name isn't on the deed. This is my home, she shrieked, color flooding her face. No, I replied calmly. You've just been squatting with a dominant personality. The sound of Joanna's raised voice brought Zach stumbling from the guest bedroom, hair disheveled, still in his pajamas. What's going on? Your wife has lost her mind, Joanna sputtered, thrusting the papers toward him. Read this. Zach blinked, confused. Chelsea, what are you doing? Correcting the power imbalance, I said simply. He skimmed the document, his expression shifting from confusion to shock. You're kicking my mom out? I'm removing someone who's made my life unlivable, I clarified. The house is in your name. I just filed the motion. Joanna turned to her son, tears suddenly welling in her eyes. Tears I'd never seen before, not even at the funeral of her husband. Zach, you can't let her do this. This is my home. Our family home. It's not, I countered, rising from my chair. The deed is solely in Zach's name. The property was transferred to him by his father 5 years ago. I turned to Zach. Did you know your mother has been claiming ownership of a house that legally belongs to you alone? Zach's eyes darted between us, confusion evident. Dad left it to me, but Mom's always lived here. It's her home too. By courtesy, not by right, I replied. A courtesy she's never extended to me, despite my legal standing as your wife. Joanna's panic was transforming into rage. Her facade of control crumbled completely as she realized the extent of what was happening. You manipulated him. You dug through private papers. You schemed behind our backs. I documented everything, I replied, voice level. All your unauthorized spending from our joint account. Your interference in every aspect of our marriage. Your systematic campaign to isolate and diminish me in my own home. It's all there in the filing, with dates, amounts, and witnesses. After everything I've done for you, she hissed, switching tactics. Taking you into my home, guiding you, teaching you how to be a proper wife. Gratitude is earned, not demanded, I cut her off. And this was never your home to take me into. She turned to Zach, her final bastion of support. Are you going to let her do this to your mother? Your own flesh and blood. For the first time since I'd known him, Zach didn't immediately leap to her defense. He stood in the hallway, the eviction notice hanging limply from his hand, gaze shifting between the two women before him. His silence was deafening. In that moment, the power dynamic that had defined our household for a year visibly shifted. Joanna, sensing her son's hesitation, let out a sound between a gasp and a sob. She snatched the papers from his hand and stormed toward the master bedroom, the room that had never been mine despite my marriage certificate. The door slammed with enough force to rattle the pictures on the wall. One fell, the glass cracking as it hit the floor, a formal portrait of Joanna in younger days. Zach stood frozen, staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. You really did this? Without talking to me first? Would you have listened? I asked quietly. Or would you have warned her, defended her, convinced me to endure another year of psychological warfare in my own home? He had no answer. I picked up my coffee cup and returned to my seat at the kitchen table. She has 30 days to find alternative arrangements. The documentation includes a full accounting of funds she's diverted from our account, funds she'll need to repay. There's also a cease and desist regarding any further unauthorized use of your name on legal documents. What do you expect me to do? He asked, voice hollow. I expect you to decide what matters more, your marriage or your mother's control. I took a sip of coffee, now lukewarm. You have 30 days to figure that out too. He ran his hands through his hair, turned and walked back to the guest bedroom without another word. From the master bedroom came the sounds of drawers being yanked open, items thrown haphazardly. Joanna's meltdown was in full swing. I remained at the table, outwardly calm despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. For the first time in our marriage, I had seized control of the narrative. I had reclaimed space in a house where I'd been systematically erased. Joanna had 30 days to vacate. Zach had 30 days to choose. And I, for once, had the floor plan and the upper hand. The day after the eviction notice, Zach left for work without speaking to me. When he returned that evening, he attempted to act as though nothing significant had happened, as if the legal documents, his mother's rage, and the fundamental shift in our household were merely a minor domestic disturbance that would soon blow over. He found me in the living room, laptop open, reviewing work presentations. Hey, he said casually, loosening his tie. Want to order takeout tonight? I looked up, studying his face. He was aiming for normalcy, desperate to avoid confrontation. Your mother's been packing all day, I replied. She broke the mirror in the hallway bathroom. He winced slightly. She'll calm down. Just needs time to process. Process what? That her illegal occupation of your property is ending. He sank onto the couch opposite me. You could have warned me about all this. I did, I said quietly. Dozens of times over the past year. Every time I told you I was unhappy, every time I asked for space or respect or simply to be acknowledged in my own home. That's different. He ran his hands through his hair. You didn't say you were planning to kick my mother out with legal papers. Would you have supported me if I had? His silence was answer enough. You could have gone easier on her, he finally said. Given her more time to adjust. She didn't go easy on me when she erased my voice for a year. I closed my laptop. She didn't give me time to adjust when she took over our wedding, our home, our marriage. Zach's expression darkened. He had expected me to apologize, to soften, to cave as I always had before. Instead, he found himself facing a woman who would no longer bend. He sulked for the next few days, alternating between strained politeness and wounded silence. He began spending evenings at a local bar, returning home with the scent of whiskey clinging to his clothes. I wasn't looking for comfort or validation from him. Those needs had withered months ago, replaced by something harder and more enduring, self-reliance. 5 days after the eviction notice, we had our first real conversation about the future. I found him in the kitchen, staring into the refrigerator with unfocused eyes. We need to talk about what happens next, I said. He closed the refrigerator door. What do you want me to say? You've made all the decisions already. I've made one decision, that I deserve basic dignity in my marriage. Everything else depends on you. On me. He laughed bitterly. How is any of this my choice? You're forcing me to choose between my wife and my mother. No, I countered. I'm asking you to choose between being my husband or her echo. There's a difference. He leaned against the counter, suddenly looking exhausted. I love you both, he said. That's not love, I replied. That's cowardice. Love requires courage. The courage to stand up for someone, to prioritize their well-being, to protect them when they're being harmed. She's my mother, he said, as if that explained everything. And I'm your wife. The woman you promised to cherish and protect. Did those vows mean anything to you? He had no answer. Meanwhile, Joanna had adopted a new strategy. Rather than packing efficiently to meet the 30-day deadline, she dragged the process out deliberately, opening a few drawers each day, sighing loudly, occasionally dropping items or slamming doors to ensure we noticed her martyrdom. She attempted to engage me several times, alternating between tearful appeals, after all I've sacrificed for this family, and veiled threats. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I responded with polite disinterest, refusing to provide the emotional reaction she sought. With Zach she was more calculated. I would find them huddled in conversation that abruptly ceased when I entered a room. She would call him multiple times during the workday, strategically when she knew we might be having lunch together. She left nostalgic family photos in prominent places. Zach as a child tucked against her side. Zach began trying small gestures of reconciliation toward me. Flowers left on the kitchen counter, breakfast ordered from my favorite cafe, a tentative hand on my shoulder as he passed. But these token efforts only highlighted how little he understood what had been broken between us. He wasn't sorry I was hurt, he was sorry I had changed. Sorry I had stopped accepting mistreatment. Sorry I had found my voice and my power. 2 weeks into the eviction period, I moved my belongings into the master bedroom. Alone. You're not sleeping in here? Zach asked from the doorway, watching me arrange my clothes in the closet Joanna had finally vacated. No, I said simply. Where am I supposed to sleep? Wherever you've been comfortable sleeping for the past year while I was in the guest room. His face flushed. That was different. Yes, I agreed. It was your choice then. It's mine now. The following day I scheduled another appointment with Ms. Riviera. This time Zach accompanied me, though reluctantly. A post-nuptial agreement? He repeated, staring at the documents she placed before us. You want a divorce? I want security, I corrected. Security that the patterns of the past year won't repeat themselves. The agreement was straightforward. The house would remain in Zach's name, but I would have equal right to occupy and modify it as I saw fit. Our finances would remain separate, with a joint account only for household expenses. And there was one additional clause that made Zach's eyes widen. If your mother returns to live in our home without my explicit written consent, I explained, I retain the right to leave the marriage with 50% of all assets, regardless of duration. You can't be serious, he whispered. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. He signed the papers the next day. Not enthusiastically, not with understanding, but with the resignation of a man who had begun to realize the consequences of his year-long silence. 3 days before the deadline, Joanna finally completed her packing. She orchestrated her departure for maximum impact, scheduling it when she knew both Zach and I would be home, hiring movers who carried box after box past us as we sat in strained silence in the living room. She left with 4 suitcases, 12 boxes, and a broken ego. As her car pulled from the driveway, I watched Zach's eyes follow it until it disappeared around the corner. His hands twitched at his sides, but he didn't move to stop her, didn't run after her, didn't promise to fix this. That night, in the silent house that suddenly felt both emptier and more spacious, he approached me as I prepared for bed. What happens to us now? He asked, his voice small. I looked at him, really looked at him, seeing both the man I had married and the stranger he had become in his mother's shadow. I don't know, I answered honestly. But I do know this. If I can build peace without you, I will. He nodded slowly, turned and walked to the guest room. The same room he had once sent me to on our wedding night. As the door closed behind him, something flickered across his face. A dawning comprehension, a belated understanding of equivalence. That's when he finally understood what he'd lost. 3 months have passed since Joanna left. 3 months of reclamation, of transformation, of rebuilding both space and self. The morning after Zach retreated to the guest room, I woke early and drove to the hardware store. I returned with paint samples in shades the house had never seen. Warm terracotta for the living room, sage green for the kitchen, a soft blue-gray for the hallways. Colors with depth and life, nothing like the sterile beige Joanna had insisted was timeless and sophisticated. When Zach came down for coffee, he found me taping sample squares to the walls. What are you doing? He asked, bewildered. Redecorating, I replied simply. The house needs color. He stared at the patches of paint, then at me. Shouldn't we discuss this first? No. I continued taping. But you're welcome to help if you'd like. He didn't help with the painting. But he didn't object either. That was progress of a sort. Over the following weeks, I systematically transformed each room. I replaced Joanna's formal drapes with light, airy curtains that actually let sunlight filter through. I took down the ancestral portraits with their judgmental eyes and hung my own selections. Vibrant landscapes, abstract pieces that spoke to me, and yes, our wedding photos displayed prominently in the entryway. I claimed the kitchen completely, filling the pantry with ingredients Joanna had banned as unhealthy or common. I planted an herb garden in the window box: basil, rosemary, thyme, mint, their fragrance greeting me each morning as I brewed coffee. I played music while I cooked. Sometimes jazz, sometimes indie rock, sometimes pop that Joanna would have dismissed as noise. Most significantly, I made the master bedroom truly mine. New bedding, new arrangement, new energy. I placed a small writing desk near the window, creating a personal workspace flooded with natural light. I hung a large mirror that Joanna had stored in the attic, claiming it was too modern. Every morning I looked into that mirror and saw someone stronger, clearer, more defined than the woman who had once stood in a wedding dress holding a guest room key. Zach watched this metamorphosis with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. He had expected anger, hostility, ultimatums, the emotional outbursts Joanna had always used. Instead, he witnessed steady, purposeful reconstruction. A woman building herself back piece by piece, creating physical space that reflected her reclaimed power. We established an unspoken rhythm of cohabitation. Polite exchanges over breakfast. Occasional shared dinners where conversations stayed light and impersonal. We functioned less as husband and wife and more as cordial roommates navigating shared territory. "Are we going to be like this forever?" he asked one evening as we passed in the hallway. "Like what?" "Like strangers. Living separate lives under the same roof." I considered his question carefully. "That depends on you." "On me. On whether you can become someone I trust again. Someone who stands beside me instead of above or behind me." He nodded slowly. "I'm trying." "I know." And he was in small ways. He had stopped taking Joanna's daily calls, limiting their contact to once a week. He had begun asking my opinion on household decisions rather than making assumptions. He had even started therapy, reluctantly at first but with growing commitment. I let him stay, not out of obligation or fear or habit but as a conscious choice. A provisional arrangement contingent on continued growth. He understood the terms now. The lease was emotional, renewable only through sustained respect and effort. Joanna, meanwhile, had established herself in a downtown condo, courtesy of the emergency fund she'd been siphoning from our accounts for years. She maintained appearances in her social circle, crafting a narrative where she had magnanimously chosen to give the young couple space. "Mom tells everyone she left to help us work on our marriage," Zach mentioned after one of their weekly calls. I smiled. "Let her. The truth doesn't need defending." Her passive-aggressive texts arrived like clockwork, thinly veiled criticisms wrapped in concern. Just checking if Zach remembered his allergy medication. "The changing seasons are so dangerous." "Saw the most elegant dining set that would suit your home beautifully. The current one always seemed temporary. Your front garden looks interesting. I know a wonderful landscaper if you need help." I never replied. Each message went read but unanswered, a small reminder that her words no longer warranted response. Eventually the frequency diminished, from daily to weekly to occasional. Her power faded with each ignored attempt at engagement. 6 weeks after Joanna's departure, I received an email from a women's support organization where I'd sought guidance during my own struggle. They were organizing a workshop series on financial independence and legal rights within marriage, and wondered if I might share my experience. I agreed immediately. Now twice monthly I sit with circles of women whose stories echo mine in different keys. Women diminished by controlling in-laws, partners, or family systems. Women taught to make themselves small, to prioritize peace over personhood, to accept invisibility as the cost of belonging. I teach them what I learned through hard experience: how to document systematically, how to research legal options, how to build financial independence while flying under the radar. I show them that power doesn't always require shouting, that strategic patience can be more effective than emotional confrontation. "Your story gives me hope," a participant told me after last week's session. "But I don't think I could do what you did. I'm not strong enough." "Strength isn't something you have or don't have," I told her. "It's something you build one small decision at a time." I see myself in these women, in their hesitation, their fear, their desperate hope for change. I recognize the person I was a year ago, standing in a guest room staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was all marriage could be. Yesterday as I watered my herb garden, Zach paused in the kitchen doorway. The house has never felt more like a home, he said quietly. I nodded. Because it finally is one. My story isn't a fairy tale with villains vanquished and a prince who saves the day. It's not about dramatic confrontations or tearful reconciliations. It's a strategy executed with precision and patience. I didn't scream or break things when boundaries were crossed. I didn't engage in emotional warfare or ultimatums. I didn't lower myself to tactics that would justify dismissal. Instead, I researched property law and spousal rights while baking cookies for dinner parties. I waited, documenting patterns while smiling politely at backhanded compliments. I signed my name in the right place at the right time, backed by knowledge that transformed legal technicalities into leverage. The girl they sent to the guest room on her wedding night? She stands in the master bedroom now, holding the deed to her own destiny. She walks through hallways painted in colors of her choosing, brushing past photographs that tell her truth. She owns the keys, the title, and most importantly, the narrative. I didn't raise my voice to be heard. I just rose. If this story of sweet revenge had you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button right now. My favorite part was when Chelsea handed Joanna the eviction notice and calmly said, "You've just been squatting with a dominant personality." What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more thrilling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.